Guns N' Roses would open for several big bands during their Appetite for Destruction tour, including The Cult, Aerosmith, and Iron Maiden. While they seemed to get along with the first two acts, they didn't feel the same love with Iron Maiden, and it resulted in the band slagging off the headliner in the press during and after the tour. Today, let's take a look at the Iron Maiden Guns N' Roses tour. Iron Maiden's manager Rod Smallwood at one point would end up getting an offer to manage Guns N' Roses around the time of Appetite for Destruction coming out. He would turn down the opportunity, according to journalist Mick Wall, because, and I quote, "there was something not right about them." Alan Niven, who managed the band Great White, would end up managing Guns N' Roses early in their career from 1987 to around 1991. He would get an offer from Smallwood to open up some shows for Iron Maiden in Canada and America in May and June of 1988. Ahead of Guns N' Roses joining the tour, they would film the video for Sweet Child of Mine. By this point, the buzz was slowly growing around the band, but they hadn't hit it big yet. The band members, according to bassist Duff McKagan's first book, were salaried, making around $125 a week, with an additional $25 in spending money while on the road. While on paper it seemed like Guns N' Roses and Iron Maiden would be a good fit, they weren't. Even McKagan would write in his book, It's So Easy and Other Lies, when our manager broke news to us, he apologized. Meanwhile, Niven would recall to author Mick Wall in the book Last of the Giants how Iron Maiden's stage props created issues with all the members of Guns N' Roses. Guitarist Izzy Stradlin called up Niven one day saying, and I quote, "Niv, there's some expletive with horns on his head and they've got cardboard icebergs on stage. What are we doing here?" With Niven adding, "So we get on the Maiden tour, and first day, swear to God, the backdrop props behind the band were robotic ducks. It's kind of early in the day and Axl's usually never there, but for some reason he's there earlier in the day, and he comes up to me and he goes, 'No photographs the entire tour.' Axl would tell Niven that he would bail from the tour if he was photographed on stage with Iron Maiden's props in the background. Iron Maiden at the time were touring on their album Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, but the record only reached gold status stateside and ticket sales were a little bit mixed. It wasn't until Guns N' Roses were added that ticket sales were boosted, with author Mick Wall stating that in Guns N' Roses camp, there was a feeling that that was the band that should have been headlining. The shows themselves would have some tense moments in Canada. At a May 13th gig at the Moncton Coliseum, Guns N' Roses left the stage early after frontman Axl Rose was hit with a beer. Axl would swear at the audience and soon stormed off stage. During a stop in Halifax, before the band broke into a cover of Knocking on Heaven's Door, something set Axl off where he challenged an audience member to come on stage and fight him. Duff would recall in his first book, Maiden was straight up metal. Metal crowds could be pretty narrow-minded back then. If you were a little weird and you were opening for Maiden, they call you the F word and punk. And punk was meant to be an insult. It meant you couldn't play your instruments. To be fair to the crowds, as much as I respect metal, we didn't fit the bill musically. We wanted to be different. Steven only had one bass drum, and while Axl sang in his high voice much of the time, he wasn't operatic. Oh, and also we didn't write songs about elves or demons and shit. Unless, of course, you consider Mr. Brownstone a demon. Slash would be interviewed while on tour with Iron Maiden by Canadian publication The Georgia Straight. He would be pretty honest about his displeasure touring with Iron Maiden, telling the publication, "It's terrible. Maiden is cool and everything, but they've got such a big stage show and new soundmen and all, and sometimes there isn't even time for us to get a sound check." The paper would go on to write, "From the sound of their performance, Slash and his bandmates didn't get one last Monday, May 30th either. About the only things you could hear were Slash's lead guitar and a bit of W. Axl Rose's lead vocals. Forget the rhythm section, and the band wasn't too impressed with the crowd's reaction to them either, threatening to pick up and go unless they got more feedback." According to Slash's book, the guitarist and Duff tried to bond with Iron Maiden's members and crew by playing darts with them backstage, but any kind of bond was quickly dashed, with him recalling how Axl one day was in a common area backstage when something set him off, resulting in him losing it and flipping over a table and storming out. From that point onwards, there would be no socializing between the bands for the rest of the tour. As the tour rolled on, Guns N' Roses were set to play 2 shows at the Irvine Meadows, but they pulled the plug on their set, claiming that Axl was suffering from vocal problems, even though some in the band's camp claimed the frontman was fine, according to Mick Wall's book. Soon enough, LA Guns replaced Guns N' Roses on the tour, and at one of the LA Guns gigs, Slash, Duff, and Izzy joined the band on stage to play a few songs. Axl would be interviewed during the 1988 Monsters of Rock Festival a few months after the tour with Iron Maiden ended, where he criticized the band here.
I Have you got anything in common with Iron Maiden?
I hope not.
Why?
I don't know, they're not, I mean, they're nice guys, but, you know, it's like political organizations, you know, your band's like a political thing, and your music or your album's kind of like your political stance. Well, theirs is completely different than ours, and I think theirs doesn't have anything to do with rock and roll as far as I'm concerned. We're a rock and roll band.
Yeah,
what they do is what they do. I don't know what it is, and I hope to never be like that. Hope it's not catchy.
Izzy, were you going to say something then?
No.
No.
In a separate interview, Duff and Slash talked to Canadian TV station Much Music, where they said the following about the tour.
With another band, so this might happen with every band, so it's nothing against Iron Maiden. It's just that their production's not together, and we never get sound checks, and their monitor guy doesn't work for us, so he doesn't know what we want, and it's just been sort of like a disaster. But we're, basically, yeah, pulling it off. And the other thing is that it's like two sides of coins as far as music goes, you know what I mean? It's like Iron Maiden sings about Vikings and Gothic influences, this and that, and dragons and stuff. And we just basically just hang out.
According to Duff's book, it wasn't until the band returned home to LA that they started getting a lot of traction on MTV and rock radio, ahead of them opening for Aerosmith that summer. In 2015, Iron Maiden frontman Bruce Dickinson would tell a French-Canadian publication that during the tour, when they were playing Quebec City, frontman Axl Rose treated the French audience poorly because they were speaking to Axl in, well, French, stating, "I should have come on stage and given him a punch. How dare he speak to my audience in that way? I always regretted not having done so." That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll Your Stories. Take care.